Hello everyone, my name is Penny and I'm here to share my AU, the Silver Ring, because I wanted to meet a lot of people, not just fanfic readers. I wanted to make this something everyone could enjoy and find something interesting involving their favorite character. I also wanted to explore more into realistic mental states the characters were experiencing after everything they went through, because I feel BSD brushes off and forgets a lot of that, especially with Juno and his blindness. As you saw, I came up with the name The Silver Ring. I wanted it to be really open to interpretation, but I did decide on a few things I wanted it to represent. So, the first idea was for it to represent a promise. The ring would signify bringing people together, like a wedding ring. It would be a sign that no matter what, these people were bound together by fate. The second meaning was the silver ring you pull on a grenade. It would show destruction and pain, what the characters really live with, no romanticizing or glamorizing it. The genuine backlash of the war, the death, the mafia, and the concept of abilities. And the third reason I can think of was a silver ring, as in an underground ring, experiment rings, the silver being the tools and such. We know that Atsushi and Chuya were canonly experimented on, as well as Chuya's clone and Paul Verlaine, and I wanted that to be taken more seriously and actually thought about. And while I did try and make this about all the characters, specifically Port Mafia and the Armed Detective Agency, I had taken a certain liking to Atsushi and Osamu while making this, wanting to dive deeper and build more background for them, considering they were so shrouded in mystery. A bit more background information before we start diving into some of the key factors. This AU is still under a lot of construction, but the timeline is pretty sound. I've spent weeks making sure no events contradicted another or something. I also made a timeline of canon characters' birth years as well as custom-made characters such as Osamu's parents so that everything would make sense. With that out of the way, we may begin. First up will be Atsushi, since he's the main character and the one this is more or less specifically about. I added quite a bit more to his background. It's a tad intense, so if cannibalism, gore, death, or cults bother you, please click off. The year the main story takes place is in 2008, by the way. Shout out to all you 2008 babies. Point 3. Atsushi was born in 1990 to a cultist family. In the beginning years of his life, he lived quite well. He had 2 parents, 4 grandparents, and an older sister. He also had 2 uncles and an aunt, but he didn't really speak with them often enough to be called family. His grandfather, the one to his mom, was the high cultist, so he really was living well. They taught him to speak and read and write, within a 5-year-old's ability, of course. He had amazing foods, meats, and the finest of juice. He was never that close with them, however. They always seemed so distant and so far out of his reach, all except his sister. He adored his sister, and she was always hanging out with him. She had this glum look whenever she was around both him and their parents, but he was too young to question it, really. His life was great up until 1995, his 5th birthday. That was truly when he realized what it had meant to be raised in a cult. Unlike his sister, who was female and possessed a rare ability, he had nothing. He was expendable for sacrifice. Placed on an altar, his hands and legs were bound with nails so he couldn't move without excruciating pain. In the corner of his eye, he could see his sister kicking and fighting at people trying to hold her back. It only made everything feel worse. Everything hurt, and he was scared. The ritual began and they started chanting, or whatever it is cults do. He wasn't sure what happened because when everything was normal again, he realized he had blacked out. His sister was sobbing still, but now in relief. He could hear faint words from his grandfather, something about the sacrifices not working, but something good happened anyways. When he thought it was over and things would be normal again, he heard a voice. 2 voices, both were very feminine and with a slight lisp. They explained what happened, the sacrifice, the binding of the 3, and how the cult thought it was just one deity. You know this deity as Byakko, and the other one you may not know was Shiro. Byakko was the goddess or deity of the moon. The cult had worshipped her for years and had given up Atsushi to her for her to eat. Shiro, what they didn't know, was bound with Byakko, the 2 acting as one concept. Byakko was the tiger, Shiro was the healer. When the cult gave up Atsushi to Byakko, they had intended to kill him so she could eat him while he was in between life and death. It ended up not working that way, instead sealing Byakko within Atsushi. And since Shiro came along, they would not die when the cultists attempted the murder. Instead of being reasonable about this and thinking something to be wrong, the cult took this as a sign, someone who wouldn't die from injury, and to a cannibalistic cult that was perfect. By May 10th, 5 days after the birthday and ceremony, Atsushi was already being fed to the cult. Arms, legs, eyes, organs. The only thing Atsushi could do was to accept it. Shiro healed over and over, and Byakko's strength had been mostly taken when the binding happened. It had been months before they could do something and stop this. And when those months came, the whole cult came crashing down to the ground. Nearly all of them had been dead. The only ones alive were Atsushi's mom and dad, who had fled, and Atsushi's sister, who had been spared. The parents had gone who knows where, and his sister had been taken in by his grandmother from his dad's side, as they hadn't been directly involved with the cult to have been killed. Atsushi had been taken to the orphanage, and his memory of the cult, considering he had been so young, would be forgotten. The first few years, 1996 to 2001, that he'd be in the orphanage would be good. He was treated fine, and he really couldn't hear Byako or Shiro anymore. He completely forgot about them, and they had gone docile. Things would be okay, finally, for him until 2002. He'd meet Tatsuhiko Shibusawa. Given to the man by Fyodor Dostoevsky, he'd end up being experimented on. Byako and Shiro would come back, and the dead apple scene would take place as canon. After this, he'd gain a more feline-like look. He was naturally albino, but now with black marks in his hair. He got facial strips, ears, a tail, sharper nails, and slit pupils. It was very odd to everyone in the orphanage, which would lead him to being maltreated until he'd leave. A lot of his story was relatively similar to canon, but I put a lot into the cult. They play a big piece in this whole story and the concept of abilities as a whole. I wanted to play into the man-eating tiger thing, except it was never because of the tiger. Atsushi only ate humans when he was younger than 5. The rumor was placed by Fyodor to mock at Atsushi for his upbringing. Fyodor and Atsushi had a lot of connections together in this AU, and you'll see that a lot. Fyodor hates abilities, and he'd hate Atsushi even more because he wasn't an ability but something worse. It was something he'd have a harder time getting rid of, and he knew that Byako would be a pain to fight given it was a goddess. Another small fact about Atsushi in this AU is that he's androgynous due to Byako. He presents both masculine and feminine because of the change Byako and Shiro would have on his body. Also, I used mostly he on Atsushi, but he's really fine with any pronouns. That's about all for Atsushi, I believe. To break it down into a small phrase, basically he was born into a cult, sacrificed to a deity. It backfired, and he lived, then was fed to the cult because of his healing ability. After, the cult died and he joined the orphanage. Later on, he would be experimented on and then mistreated by everyone. Finally, in 2008, he'd meet the ADA.